If I asked you to guess which countries had the second highest number of Nobel Prizes in chemistry over the past 2 decades, which would you pick? Maybe Germany, France? It's Israel and Japan. 12 Israelis have gone on to win Nobel Prizes. 6 of those Israelis won the prize for chemistry. 2 got the prize in economics, 1 Israeli author won the literature prize, and over the years, 3 have been awarded the Peace Prize for negotiating certain agreements, with mixed results, as we'll see. Let's start with the very first Israeli to win a Nobel Prize, Shai Agnon, who won the prize for literature in 1966. He shared it with a Jewish German-Swedish poet named Nelly Sachs, but we'll be focusing on Agnon since this video is specifically about Israelis. Agnon was born in 1888 in an area of Eastern Europe on the modern border of Poland and the Ukraine. His parents were wealthy and he was educated in both Jewish tradition and European culture. Agnon had been writing since the age of 15, but in 1924, his manuscripts and books were destroyed in a house fire, a devastating loss for him. The fire clearly remained on his mind, and he often made references to it in some of his later stories. In 1966, almost 2 decades after the Nobel Committee first considered Agnon for the Literature Prize, they decided to award it to him along with Sachs. He remains the only Israeli to ever win the prize for literature, but when it comes to winning Nobels in general, the country was just getting started. The next Israeli to win a Nobel Prize was Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who shared the 1978 Peace Prize with Anwar Sadat, then president of Egypt. They were awarded the prize for the peace agreements they negotiated earlier that year. Now, Begin was something of a controversial figure in Middle Eastern politics, partly because of his background as a leader of the Irgun paramilitary group before the State of Israel was established. When he arrived in Oslo to receive the award, hundreds of pro-Palestinian demonstrators organized protests, to the point that the ceremony had to be moved elsewhere. Despite the controversy surrounding Begin, though, he accomplished a lot over the course of his political career. But we have a whole separate episode about him that you can check out if you're interested in learning more. He and Sadat were awarded the prize because of the peace agreements they made at Camp David earlier in 1978. Egypt and Israel had been enemies ever since the State of Israel was established, and the Camp David Accords transformed that into a much friendlier relationship that continues to this day. After Begin, it was 16 years before another Israeli won a Nobel, and when they did, it was the Peace Prize yet again. In 1994, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, along with Shimon Peres, who was the foreign minister at the time, shared the Peace Prize with Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. Like Begin and Sadat, the reason was a set of peace agreements they negotiated. But this time, although they didn't know it yet, the agreements were doomed to failure. The fact that these 3 shared the Peace Prize was pretty ironic because none of them actually liked each other. Even Rabin and Peres, who worked together closely for many years, were famous for their rocky relationship. Arafat, meanwhile, had been heavily involved in terrorist attacks against Israel. But in 1993, the 3 of them sat down to negotiate the Oslo Accords, a series of agreements that were meant to establish peace between Israel and the Palestinian people. But even in 1993, the award was very controversial. A lot of people took issue with Arafat sharing it since he'd been so involved in terrorism. So that prize didn't go so well. But then came the prizes in the sciences. Israel's first Nobel Prize in the science was in 2002, but it wasn't chemistry yet. Daniel Kahneman shared the prize in economic sciences with American economist Vernon Smith. Ever wish you could predict someone else's decisions? Well, that's what Kahneman figured out how to do in certain contexts. It's called prospect theory. Born in Tel Aviv in 1934, he actually earned his undergraduate and doctoral degrees in psychology, not economics. But he was always interested in how intuition affects the choices we make, and in the 1970s, he started thinking about how to apply psychology to economic decisions. Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky discovered a major flaw in the theories others had already come up with. They assumed that people chose rationally, but they don't. Tversky died in 1996, so he wasn't eligible for the Nobel Prize when Kahneman was awarded it in 2002. The next Israelis to win a Nobel Prize did it only 2 years later, when Aaron Ciechanover and Avram Hershko shared the 2004 prize in chemistry with their American colleague, Erwin Rose. And when it comes to chemistry prizes, this was the first of many. This prize was awarded for the 3 chemists' work on how proteins in cells are broken down. In the 1970s, they discovered a system that identifies which proteins need to be broken down and tells the cell when and where to do it. Once we discovered this new system, scientists realized it's often a key part of how cancer develops. And ever since then, researchers have been using this discovery to develop more targeted treatments for certain cancers. For example, in 2003, regulators in the US approved a drug that uses this theory to treat multiple myeloma, a type of bone marrow cancer. The following year, 2005, saw another Israeli win a Nobel Prize. But this time, it was back to economics, with Israeli mathematician Robert Aumann sharing the prize with American economist Thomas Schelling. Aumann focused on game theory, the study of the strategies people use when someone else's choices also affect the outcome. Probably the most famous example of game theory is a game show called Golden Balls, where you and a partner have to each decide whether you want to split the jackpot or steal it all for yourself. The mathematics behind Aumann's research can get very complicated very quickly, but basically he figured out a useful way to analyze situations like in that game show. He also extended his ideas beyond pure game theory to social interactions, for example, when he used them to analyze long-term relationships and situations where lots of people have to work together. He even published a paper using game theory to resolve a long-standing argument in the Talmud. 4 Israelis have won Nobel Prizes since Aumann, and they were all in one subject. You guessed it, chemistry. First, we have Ada Yonat, who shared the 2009 chemistry prize with 2 other non-Israeli scientists. To this day, Yonat is the only Israeli woman to ever win a Nobel Prize, and one of only 5 women in the entire world to win the Nobel Prize in chemistry. Remember how Ciechanover and Hershko discovered the system that cells use to break down proteins? Well, Yonat's work focused on basically the opposite, how cells create proteins. Specifically, she discovered a whole bunch of new details about the structure of ribosomes, the parts of the cell that make proteins. Thanks to Yonat's work, we now know a whole lot more about some of the tiniest but most important parts of our cells. The next Israeli Nobel Prize in chemistry came in 2011 when Dan Shechtman won for his discovery of quasicrystals, a type of material that's sort of a crystal but also sort of not. Instead of being perfectly symmetrical in every way, the pattern might only extend in certain directions. The thing is, scientists didn't think this was actually possible in real life. They'd never seen a material like that until Shechtman discovered one by accident. He was experimenting with different types of metals when he noticed a weird pattern in the data. Eventually, he figured out that he was looking at a real-life quasicrystal. It took a long time for other scientists to accept Shechtman's discovery, but their discovery totally changed how scientists think about some of the most fundamental aspects of matter. That, and the ridicule from other scientists that Shechtman had to fight, inspired the Nobel Committee to award him the Chemistry Prize in 2011. The next, and currently the most recent Nobel Prize to be awarded to Israelis was yet another chemistry prize. In 2013, Israeli researchers Michael Levitt and Aryeh Werschel shared the prize with their American colleague Martin Karpus. Their contribution to the field? A type of computer program that has allowed scientists to simulate chemical reactions they would never have been able to analyze before. It was the 1970s. Computers existed, but they were enormous machines that took up entire rooms, and even the best computers in existence were thousands of times less powerful than the average smartphone. Still, even those early computers were super helpful for studying chemistry, but computers at the time just couldn't handle larger molecules. There were just too many moving parts to calculate with much accuracy. Karpus, Levitt, and Werschel figured out a way to simulate those reactions accurately without using nearly as much computational power. This approach was incredibly helpful back then since computers weren't exactly super powerful. But even now, scientists are still using it to study chemistry that even today's computers wouldn't be powerful enough to handle otherwise. Nobel Prizes are often awarded for groundbreaking discoveries that happened decades ago, but in this case, their work is still very much in use today. In a way, that's true for the state of Israel as a whole. The early Zionists founded a country that emphasized a connection to the real world and brought with it an almost inevitable dedication to knowledge and drive towards innovation. And if Israel's Nobel Prizes are anything to go by, that's an attitude that continues to this day. Thanks for watching. See you guys next week.